today's video, we are going to talk about pivot tables. Pivot tables are a very powerful tool, and it is one of the very first things that I like to cover when teaching people Excel. So I'm very excited to dive into today's video. So if you download this spreadsheet in the description of this video, you should have an access link to download this spreadsheet from Google Docs, and then from there you can download it into Excel and follow along with today's video. So first thing we are going to do is talk about what is a pivot table. A pivot table allows you to summarize a large set of data in a very short period of time. So in today's video, we are going to create these tables from the customer summary, missing paperwork, and the driver summary. These are some very basic pivot tables, and once you're done creating these, that should give you a good understanding of how to create a pivot table. So here we are taking a look at all of this data. So if I scroll down, you can see that there in this set of test data, there's 809 rows. So if you were to go through this manually and try to provide a summary individually, this would take you a very, very long time. So luckily, Excel is very powerful, and with the help of pivot table, we can do this in a very short period of time. So going over to the customer summary, we can see here that we have $1.8 million in revenue, and you can see how it's broken out by each individual customer. So I would view this as, the very high level management summary, giving you a basic overview of your customer breakdown by revenue. If we go on to the missing paperwork, so this is another pivot table we've created where we've filtered on all of the invoices that have not been billed to our customer. So out of all of the $1.8 million that we are booking as revenue, we're saying that we have $14,000 or approximately $15,000 in missing paperwork still from customer A, B, and C. And then if we go to the driver summary, we can see the performance by driver name. So this is the driver name, driver A through K, and the customers that they are running for. So this is saying driver A here is pulling in $263,000 of revenue, and looks like driver F is leading the charge with over $500,000 in revenue. And you can see where that number is broken out by and which customer. So these are the three pivot tables that we are going to cover today. So first step in creating a pivot table, we are going to highlight the entire set of data. Okay, so to illustrate something in a couple of minutes, I'm going to intentionally only highlight the data set in here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight all this information here, and I'm using my keyboard shortcut. So if you don't know how to do that, to highlight the whole table very quickly without having to do that manually, go check out our keyboard shortcuts video. And then from here, I'm going to create a pivot table with keyboard shortcut Alt-N-V. So if I go back to doing that manually from the home screen, I can go Insert, Pivot Table. But again, I like to use shortcuts because it really helps save a lot of time. So I'm going to go ahead and create this in a separate tab, just so you can see it. But if we wanted to add this to an existing spreadsheet, existing tab that's open, we can click existing and we can go and select the location we want. But for this purpose, I'm going to just throw this into a new one, and I'm just going to call this test for now. You can name the tab whatever you want to. So in order to edit the fields now, I want to click inside the pivot table. And then I'm just going to go ahead and play around with this and create different views. So the best way that I've learned really anything in Excel is just trial by error. Go ahead and throw stuff into buckets and see what happens. So we're going to throw this into the rows column. Whoops. Throw that into the rows column. and you can see how that's already populated. Now I'm going to want my revenue in here. I'm going to intentionally put this over here we very quickly see that that looks weird. So that we right off the bat, we know that probably isn't the place to put it. So we're going to put it in the values column. So that is, we're one step closer to replicating that customer summary that I talked about. So I'm going to format it a little bit, turn to $, just clean it up, just make it look prettier and easier to read. So if we go back to our customer summary, that's really pretty simple, replicating the customer summary already. The only thing that one had was the origin and destination and the filters. It's not really that important for the purpose of replicating this. We'll get into what these filters mean here in a second. So going back to the pivot table, the data set, if we wanted to do this again on an existing spreadsheet, here's what I would do. So Alt NV, going to create that, going to go to existing spreadsheet. I'm going to go to my test data here, and I'm just going to throw this off to the side here. And again, I can just go ahead and replicate that pivot table pretty simply. And I'll go ahead and reformat that. So you can add it to a new tab, or you can add it to an existing tab, whatever you want. One thing that I would recommend doing is not to stack pivot tables directly beneath each other, and I'll show you why. If you do that and you are trying to slice and dice and get different views, so if I go ahead and try to throw this destination setting into below the customer, you're going to see that Excel is not going to like that. You can see here, you get the error. A pivot table report cannot overlap another pivot table report. So this is saying right off the bat that you can't stack multiple pivot tables on top of each other. So that way, whenever I have a sheet where I'm going to add multiple pivot tables, I like to stack them side by side in terms of columns instead of directly beneath each other. So just a quick tip on that. So going back to the pivot table, so next step, and another great thing you can do is you can also copy an existing pivot table as long as you're grabbing the entire pivot table. So if you're just grabbing this, it's not going to work. You need to grab any filters that you have as well. So if I want to copy this and replicate the missing paperwork here, I'm just going to paste this over here just like that, and I'm going to reformat my column. So excuse me, let me make that smaller again. So a shortcut to make the columns wider is going to be Alt-O-C-A-A. So notice how that just automatically made the columns wider without even having to do that manually. You know, a lot of people, when they get a column and they can't read the text, they'll stretch it out manually. So that's a very quick shortcut that I like to use all the time. And I'm sorry, it was Alt-O-C-A, not Alt-O-C-A-A. Alt-O-C-A is the shortcut for that. So we are going to now replicate the missing paperwork. So how are we going to do that? We are going to do that by, let me do some Control Z here. Looks like I typed in the origin. There we go. So we are going to do that by filtering on the invoice mail date, so that we know, just because, you know, from our operational data, that if there is no date in the invoice mail date, so you can see this says null, that means that we have not billed our customer yet. So with that being said, we want to filter on all of the invoices that do not have an invoice mail date. Okay, so I'm going to go into, so if you see all the different dates that we have in here as the bill dates to our customer, we're going to filter on all the nulls, and then we're just going to select OK. So there you can see it. We filtered on all of the invoices that have not been billed to our customer. So this is the missing paperwork tab, where we want to track how we're doing operationally in terms of collecting bill of ladings. So now if we go over to the driver summary, I'm going to copy this table over. Again, I'm going to paste this over here so I have some room to move. If we take a quick glance at replicating this table, okay, so it looks like it's being filtered on the drivers. So instead of customers, I'm going to be filtering on the driver's name. So if we come over to here, I'm going to move the customer over to the column section because we have our customers in here as the column headers. So now I'm going to pull in my driver name into the rows, and now you can see we have a breakdown here, just how the previous table is, and now we're going to go back to all, and then now we can see the same table, all the revenue broken out by driver and also by customer as well. So one thing that I did in the very beginning of this video is I intentionally only highlighted this set of data. Okay, so this is not going to be in your test set of data, but I'm just going to copy, there's no rhyme or reason, I'm just picking a random set of data and I'm going to copy and paste that down below what was previously there. So I am going to refresh my pivot table. So when I do, if I go in from the home screen and I go to data, refresh all, it is going to refresh all the pivot tables in this entire spreadsheet. Okay, so one thing that is very key in creating pivot tables that you anticipate to continuously update with large sets of data is in the very front end. What you want to do is, instead of only highlighting the set of data, so if we go back to the very first thing we did to get this pivot table created, we highlighted all the data in this spreadsheet. Instead of doing that, what you should do is highlight all of the columns that you anticipate being in your pivot table. So this is highlighting essentially every row in the columns that we've selected now. Okay, so if I go back and change my data set here, we can go to the the analyze under the pivot table tools and change the data source for an existing pivot table. So you can see here what this pivot table is highlighted on is cell A1 through G809. So we really want the entire column. So in order to correct that for an existing pivot table, I'm just going to take out all of the defined rows. So I'm going to leave that A through G. And if you're wondering what the dollar signs are, those are absolute references that just lock the cell into place. I won't get too much into detail about it in this video, but go ahead and leave those dollar signs there. So now you can see that set of data has updated, and I'm just going to pull this blank out of here. So in the previous pivot table, our revenue was 1.814 million, and now it is 1.853 million. So now that we've changed the data source, and again, I'm going to go ahead and replicate a new one so you can see it. So I'm just going to grab all the columns, Alt and V, and I'm just going to put this in a new tab just so you can see it as well. So let's just go ahead and do the driver summary. So I'm going to put the driver name in the rows, customer in the columns, and revenue in the total. You see we got a blank here. I'm just going to pull that blank out because it doesn't have any values and we don't really need it at this time. So I'm going to reformat this into some pretty numbers, dollars. There we go. So now we have our summary. Not really necessary to have anything in the filters as of right now. So notice we have 1.853 million, and I am going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go up here, and again I'm just going to copy some more data, copy and paste the same data down here, and then now when I hit refresh, this table is going to automatically refresh with the new numbers. So I've added numbers, rows, numbers and rows to the spreadsheet. So now you can see we went from 1.853 million to over 2 million. Now this updated the entire spreadsheet. So notice how these tables did not update, only because they are still locked onto the previous data set, because we did not anchor on just the columns. See, we have the A1 through G809 issue again. When we go and correct that individually, we are going to get the same numbers. Well, that covers our lesson for today. I really hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, and I hope you are learning a little bit more about Excel with these videos. Tune in till next time. If you liked this video, go ahead and like our video, and go ahead and subscribe to our future videos as well. Thanks. Bye.